Right, hello. My name is Robert Houghton. I'm an Associate Professor in Human Factors at the University of Nottingham. And I'd like to tell you about some research and residence work I've been doing. My project concerns occupant sensing in connected and autonomous vehicles and how that data can be used for reassurance and potentially remanufacture. About me, very briefly. My area is human factors, which I appreciate is not necessarily the most well-known of all engineering subjects, but it's an engineering discipline where we're very much concerned with the world of work. We're involved with the design of technology, equipment, tools, processes and procedures, very much from the perspective of how can we reconcile human strengths, weaknesses, capabilities, potentials with the design of equipment and systems. We think about people as physical beings, their physical bodies and strengths and limitations in that regard, cognitive beings, brains that are good at some things and not so good at other things, people with feelings, beliefs, values, a pattern of life, things they're concerned with, things they're not concerned about, and as social beings. So we act often together as groups, teams, at a corporate level, at a society level, at an international level. So we're very much interested in seeing people in the round. My own research background has been mainly in cognition in areas like defence, digital economy and the geospatial world. Particularly for this project, some formative interests have included some work in crowdsourcing, where I looked at people generating their own mapping data to represent unplanned developments in Africa, citizen science, where people looked at some aerial imagery, in this case actually of Mars, and were able to analyse it and make some discoveries. So I don't know if it's very easy to see, but on the right-hand side is actually a new crater discovered by a citizen there on Mars through one of the projects I was involved with, and also condition monitoring, so that's sensors put on technical systems, whether that's perhaps in a vehicle, perhaps in a train, perhaps on an escalator, could be within a power station, some sort of process industry or plant, to speak to the health of the machinery and how we can interpret and use that information to guide our own decision making. Takes a different turn here. So again, this comes from a human factors in design perspective. Because it's sort of broad ranging around transport, data, telemetry and so on, this is a cross-catapult project, connected places and high value manufacturing. And the background for this was that I was involved with an evidence review for the government around human factors of shared transport and really what would it take to get people to share trips, to shift from, if you like, private cars over to either the situation where you share a journey with another person, perhaps that's a shared mode, or alternatively, perhaps you draw on a pool of perhaps one day shared bikes, could be a shared car, or in future it could be a shared connected and autonomous vehicle. And there are certain needs people have, it appears, and things they need to be reassured about. And feed that in with condition monitoring, and I started to think, well, actually, we spend a lot of time looking at the monitoring of technical systems. Is this boiler okay? Is this engine okay? Is this pipe okay? Why couldn't we apply a similar idea to looking at sensing people when they're in these vehicles? So you're being driven by an automatic car. Rightly, there's a lot of interest in external sensing, so it doesn't crash into things, and so it goes in the right direction and gets you where you need to go. But can we also think about the internal environment? What would it be constructive to sense there? To what degree should the vehicle be looking after and towards its actual occupants, and what applications could we have? And it occurs to me there's sort of two main applications, one in reassurance, so the vehicle senses your presence, it makes sure you're okay. We very much don't want people to be taken ill in a sort of automatic vehicle for it to drive around and not show care for them. Are there more options for interaction? Could this be a sort of a more interesting environment if it's interactive and it's got lots of sensing in? Equally, these are likely to be very expensive platforms at first. What are the potential for antisocial behaviour, vandalism, and perhaps if people want to share one, so they're going to a common destination. Perhaps it's coming back from the station scenario. What sort of looking after and monitoring would we need there as well? The other use of the data can be into feedback to the redesign and improvement of the service itself, possibly even the redesign and refitting of the vehicle itself, based on patterns of use and what we can infer from them. So that's the idea, to see what value can be got out of actually monitoring the passengers. And in general, the cabin of the vehicle is a very interesting environment for this anyway. It's got a public feel to it, it's a private feel to it, and it's a sort of controlled environment. We know what the parameters are, they're kind of fixed. So to look ahead, obviously we don't have fleets of connected and autonomous vehicles at the moment driving up and down the motorways, ferrying people to and fro. So one way to come at this instead is to do some, if you like, reconnaissance of the area and work out what can be detected about people, how that could be used, what it shouldn't be used for perhaps, what sensors might not be a great idea, and to demonstrate some example cases. And then to look ahead to perhaps a user-centric data-driven paradigm for actually using this data in redesign. So we've had to draw on a range of different approaches here, whether it's literature review, simply asking people, giving people scenarios, developing little ways of measuring things on scales, and also actually trying things out and sort of seeing what the consequences would be. The vision for this is very much that, the more you use something, perhaps the better it gets. So certainly when it comes to things in the transport space, very expensive, often subject to rework, midlife upgrades and the like, repair. They're not disposable fundamentally. And also a bit of paradox to find in my own work that for human factors and ergonomics work, often data is quite hard to get hold of. If I get someone into a driving simulator for an hour, say, it takes me an hour to get an hour of data from them. This is a bit strange when you think that, of course, while this is going on, millions and millions of people are driving cars everywhere. Is there some way we can start to funnel some of this data back in? Was involved in a paper about this a few years ago, proposing this general sort of idea. The field becomes the laboratory. So the idea that people now do have more of a digital footprint, so they interact with different systems in the world, and can we tap that for good? Are there good things we can do with that to help them? Alternatively, you could see this as applying the internet model to physical products and systems. Again, the big internet players record lots and lots of data about interaction with their systems constantly. And so through this, they're able to refine the design, because they have a record of every interaction and how it went. Is this the right font for an advert? Have we positioned this in the right place? How many people click on it if we move it by just a pixel to the side? You can do these fine-grained, huge, vast experiments live effectively. Is there something we can do to essentially get in on that kind of action? And finally, from collecting this data, there is a ladder of interpretation as well which we can traverse. So the simplest way of thinking about it is, if we can record some stuff, we at least have the use history of the vehicle. How many people have been in it? This many people. Okay, so factual information. With a bit of interpretation, can we get to a behavioural level where we say, well, this is what they were doing? 6 out of 10 people sit on the right. Who knows? But that sort of idea that we can start to draw conclusions about what people are getting up to. And perhaps even beyond that, can we move into how they were feeling? Did they seem engaged? Did they seem bored? What were their intentions, perhaps? So there's a lot of potential here. Important to consider at the same time while I'm talking about all this issues of data collection, very important that ethical and privacy issues are front and centre. And I guess my argument through this work is the way to look at this is to approach data collection and sensing from a point of specification. What do I need to get? What would that data look like? How would I use it productively? And not to just start throwing sensing around or hauling in the big data and just hoping you can crunch it down. A more focused, specified approach. where we can look at the issues as they emerge as well. And there's a good example of one in a minute. So as part of this, it comes in many different pieces, small pieces to be joined up. One area of this is obviously what do people need. So we looked at things around, for example, safety and trust concerns. This results in things like information ahead of being picked up. What's the state of the vehicle? If I'm going to leap in this thing, what's it like? What are my expectations? Is it clean? Is it working? Where's it coming from? All things that sensing and I guess apps can provide. Things around passenger identification for pickup, control mechanisms, communication with the vehicle, and very much the safety and reassurance piece. What do I need to feel okay about this, and to make sure that it knows I'm here. It's not going to do anything strange. It's not going to drive into a car wash with the windows open because it doesn't think there's anyone in the back. Some silly scenarios, some quite serious ones actually people have concerns about, and some sort of oversight is required. People feel about this in other settings. For example, guards on trains would be a good example of offering reassurance in that setting. There's also the use of travel time. Again, you're sitting in a connected and autonomous vehicle, it's doing driving, what are you going to do? Well, based on what people currently use time for, there's some interesting things that emerge, of course. Some people say, well, it's for work and constructive use. Other people say, no, it's for leisure and relaxation. Actually, a lot of people emphasise the liminal nature of this time where it's actually sort of vanished off the calendar. And that sort of ambiguity, whether it's train or driving really, I'm at work, I'm not at work, I'm at leisure, I'm not at leisure. You can contact me, I can contact you, but I have a set of alibis if I don't want to be contactable. And that vagueness is actually something people are interested in, which makes me wonder, about how we manage this always connected vision of the future, because it turns out people value connection, they value disconnection. It seems that they value actually a little bit of a space in between as well, of ambiguity. In terms of demonstrating the sort of data collection, it sounds like a heavy concept. I think it's fairly simple, really. This was a simple system, consumer parts, very cheap, very reliable, very robust. Very little computing. I wanted to see if we could collect posture from a chair rigged with this stuff. Turns out we could. We used an approach I won't go into now, but using a refinement of fuzzy logic to identify different postures. And the graph to the bottom left of the screen shows human versus automatic chair detection of this. It turns out that the chair and humans agreed nearly all the time. The chair was just a bit quicker, and that's just human reaction time, pressing a button to say, oh yes, we've just seen that person, our test subject, change their position. So very reliable, fairly straightforward. On the right, we see some examples of how you could start to do some interpretation of these data. So, for example, this is actually somebody over a work day. COVID has sort of prevented taking this out into the wild, although, as you can see, it's simple enough sensors, so obviously something that could be experimented with without it, being very dramatic. But this was more of a workplace example, and what we see here, whether it's easy for you to see or not, is that the person here starts their day. There's a flurry of activity. Their posture is quite good. They're actually able to sit upright at the beginning of the day. There's then a bit of a slump into leaning back, which looks a lot like a teleconference, and in fact was a series of teleconferences. A flurry of activities, sort of answering emails and signing some forms. Then out, off to lunch, so it was able to detect that. Various breaks are shown here through the away from chair position. And then later in the day, actually, what I would interpret as fatigue sets in, and posture becomes a little less stable. There's a lot more leaning to the right, then a bit of leaning to the left, and really associated with, I would say, sort of some degree of discomfort in the seating. It's not necessarily offering the support needed for the full day. Similarly, you can imagine in sort of transport use, is someone okay? Are they awake? Are they moving? We were also able to use this technology just for fun, really, to go through a sort of guided chair exercise routine that might, I don't know, potentially guard against deep vein thrombosis. What it does is show what people are up to, in an inferred way at least. So that was an example of something we could do anyway, just to make the point. A further part of this is obviously looking at how this integrates into the product and service design. I've used a socio-technical method here from human factors and ergonomics called cognitive work analysis, and what this has involved is engaging with a few experts in the area. We went through what are the irreducible functions of a transport system, in this case a taxi model, regardless of technology and however it's fulfilled. And then we were able to look at, well, what could an internet-enabled service do? How would that differ from a sort of 1960s sort of traditional taxi? Through to what could a CAV start doing? What could AI start moving into? Where's the sort of places it would take over? And it's very much identifies in a sort of formative way through several iterations of analysis where this data would come to bear and what functions it would fulfill and how it could be used in a constructive manner. So this is only a modest methodological development, but moving this from, I guess, more of a designerly technique into more of something you can use with people as a pseudo road mapping approach. So that's been very interesting too, to look how it might work in the future and then how service design and perhaps physical design can be influenced. In terms of impact engagement, this is a fast-moving sector. It's very dynamic. It's commercially driven. That's a really good thing. It's very lively. There's exciting things happening all the time. And so that's actually, I would argue, why it's important to get a bit of reconnaissance in, a little bit of look into the future, which is what I'm aiming to do here, to have a bit of anticipatory influence. Because one of the issues is once things are designed, manufactured out in the world, it's actually quite hard to change them. So any sort of early comment, early identification of issues, I believe has a value. There's a subsidiary thing here about the uses of human data in redesign I'm very interested in. Can we start to harness all the data that's out in the world based on interaction? I don't argue to replace fine-grained work. In fact, there are things here based on a detailed interview, analysis and so on. But there is potential here, I think, for the future. And also, an idea around designing to collect data based on very close specification. So a good example of that in the previous slides was when I used more precise sensors to detect human posture, I actually ended up weighing people inadvertently to a high degree of accuracy. So much so that if they left the room, I could make an educated guess about what they've been up to. You can use your own imagination there. And at least discovering this, it leads you to think, well, what could we do? One is to actually never collect the data in that form, perhaps normalise it in some way, privacy by design idea. The other is to make sure it's extremely secure if you are going to collect it, because now it's personal data. The other option is actually say, is there some use we can put this to with everyone's agreement and consent? Could it be the case, and I have mixed feelings about this myself, that you're driving your car and one day it says, you're looking a bit heavier than usual, do you want to do something about that? Or is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? I don't know. But it shows there are these sort of richer possibilities for interactions with things. One outcome is if you heavily censor a vehicle enough, every time you get in your car, you're having some sort of pseudo-medical diagnostic run on you. Might be a good thing, might be a bad thing. That's down to sort of human interest and values, of course. In terms of who this could be relevant to, I'm very interested in industry, obviously. Hard to identify in some ways, ahead of actually the sort of commercial manifestation of the stuff. Obviously RTOs, including the catapults I'm already working with, government, if to some extent, and I would say also many of the things we're looking at here in one setting would generalise to other connected and autonomous other things, whether it's other modes. For example, you can see the seat sensing in the aerospace industry being of interest. My silly example around exercise in chair now, from a deep vein thrombosis perspective, for example, might be more compelling. Whether it's rail, maybe some other mode, but also in the domestic sphere, in work, or in any environment that's designable, really. This is one very small part of it. I believe there's a much wider set of challenges around this. Thank you very much.